Before moving on to the story, if you subscribe to the channel and like it, I will be very happy. Good listening. It was supposed to be just another adventure, a harmless exploration. The four of us, Mia, Jake, Sarah, and I, had been exploring abandoned buildings for years. This one, though, felt different. The building towered over us, its once vibrant facade now decaying, ivy crawling over the broken windows. As we entered, the air felt heavier. "Guys, this place gives me the creeps," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty hallway. Jake, always the skeptic, laughed. "Come on, Mia. It's just an old building. What are you scared of? Ghosts?" "Shut up, Jake," Mia shot back. "I'm serious. It feels wrong." Sarah nodded. "I feel it too. Let's just be quick and get out of here." We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing through the dusty corridors. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a door, half hidden behind old, crumbling furniture. There was something about it, something unsettling. "Should we?" Sarah hesitated. "I mean, we didn't come all this way to stop now," Jake said, already reaching for the door handle. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a dark stairwell that led down into what looked like a basement. The air that rushed out was thick and stale, smelling of dampness and decay. "This is so messed up," Mia muttered, but she followed us down the stairs anyway. The basement was vast, far larger than we expected. Piles of forgotten objects were scattered everywhere. Broken furniture, old toys, and rotting books. It was as if the place had been abandoned in a hurry. "Look at this place," I whispered, shining my flashlight around. "It's like time stopped down here." "Yeah," Sarah added, "but why?" Just then, we heard it, a soft shuffling sound from the far corner of the room. Mia let out a small gasp, her hand gripping my arm tightly. We all turned, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, and then we saw him. A man. His clothes were torn, his hair matted, and his skin pale, almost translucent. He stood there, silent, watching us. "What the hell?" Jake started, but the man raised a trembling hand. Don't come any closer," he rasped, his voice weak and hoarse. "Who are you?" I asked, stepping forward cautiously. "What are you doing down here?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted around the room, as if he was afraid of something. Or someone. "I've been trapped," he whispered finally. "Down here for years." "Trapped?" Sarah echoed. "By who?" The man's face twisted in a mix of fear and desperation. "The house, it doesn't let anyone leave." Jake scoffed. "You're joking, right? Who are you trying to scare?" The man's eyes met Jake's, cold and serious. "Do I look like I'm joking?" We stood there in stunned silence for a moment. The man's eyes were wild, filled with terror. Mia stepped forward cautiously. "How long? Have you been down here?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I lost count. Decades, maybe." "That's impossible," Jake said, his voice hard. "No one can survive down here for that long." The man pointed toward the far end of the basement, where the walls seemed to vanish into darkness. "The basement, it goes deeper. There's more, but it's not safe." "Not anymore." "What do you mean, not safe?" I asked, a cold shiver running down my spine. "They're down there," he whispered, eyes wide. "They keep me here. They won't let me go. They won't let anyone go." "Who?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Who won't let you leave?" His breathing quickened. "The house is alive, and it's hungry." Jake let out a harsh laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to scare us." "Jake," I warned, but he didn't listen. "Listen, man," Jake continued, stepping toward the man. "If you've been down here for years, why haven't you just walked out the front door?" The man's face twisted into a grim smile. "You think I haven't tried? I've tried every day for as long as I can remember." "Then why are you still here?" Mia asked softly. "Because they won't let me leave," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. A loud crash echoed from behind us, and we all jumped, spinning around. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the shadows. A flicker of motion, too fast to catch. "Did you see that?" Sarah gasped, clutching my arm. Jake turned to the man, his expression hardening. "What the hell is going on?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he backed away from us, retreating into the darkness. "Wait!" I called after him, but he was gone. "We need to get out of here," Mia said, panic rising in her voice. "Now!" We turned to leave, but the door at the top of the stairs, our way out, slammed shut with a deafening bang. Jake ran to it, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he yelled, slamming his shoulder against the door. "No, no, no," Mia whispered, backing away. Suddenly, we heard it again, a soft shuffling sound, but this time, it was closer. What is that?" Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. The man's voice echoed from the shadows. "They're coming." Before any of us could react, the lights in the basement flickered, and for a brief moment, we saw them. Figures twisted and deformed, emerging from the darkness. Jake screamed, running toward the door, pounding on it with all his strength. Mia and Sarah clung to each other, frozen in terror. "They won't let you leave," the man whispered again, his voice carrying through the now pitch-black room. The figures grew closer, their distorted faces barely visible in the dim light. My heart raced, and I could feel cold hands brush against my skin. We were trapped, and they were hungry. The basement had become a nightmare. The air felt thick, heavy with dread, as the dark figures crept closer. I could hear Sarah's shallow breathing beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly that my fingers began to go numb. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Get the door open!" "I'm trying," Jake yelled, throwing his full weight against the door again and again. But it was no use. The door remained firmly shut, as though it had become part of the walls themselves. Mia's eyes darted around the room, wide with panic. "What do they want? What are those things?" The man's voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed from the darkness. "They want us." Suddenly, one of the figures lunged forward, and Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back, but the figure seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared, blending back into the shadows. "Stay together," I shouted, my heart racing. "They're playing with us," Jake muttered, backing away from the door and joining us in the center of the room. "They're not real. They can't be." But the fear in his voice betrayed him. We all knew, deep down, that whatever these things were, they were far from imaginary. "We need to find another way out," I said, glancing around the room for any other possible exit. Mia pointed to the far corner, where the basement stretched further into the darkness. "What about there?" The man's warning echoed in my mind. "It's not safe, not anymore." But we didn't have a choice. Staying here would mean certain death, or worse. "Let's go," I said, motioning for everyone to follow. "Stay close." We moved cautiously toward the dark corner, our flashlights flickering like they were barely holding on to life. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe as we walked, as though the darkness itself was alive and watching us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I strained my ears, and sure enough, there it was, a low, rumbling sound like something large moving beneath the floor. "What is that?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to find out," Jake muttered, glancing over his shoulder. We reached the far wall and found a narrow passage leading further into the basement. It was almost completely hidden by stacks of old boxes and debris, as if someone, or something, had deliberately tried to conceal it. "This must be it," I said, pushing aside the boxes to clear a path. Jake hesitated. "And if it's not, then we're dead," I said bluntly, locking eyes with him. "Do you have a better idea?" He shook his head, and without another word, we all squeezed into the narrow passage, our flashlights barely illuminating the way ahead. The walls were damp, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. The deeper we went, the colder it became, until our breath hung in the air in front of us like mist. "It's freezing down here," Mia whispered, rubbing her arms for warmth. "I don't like this," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "It feels like we're walking straight into a trap." "Just keep moving," I urged. "We can't turn back now." Suddenly, the passage opened up into a larger chamber. It was darker than the basement above, and there was an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, cracked and weathered with age. Surrounding it were symbols carved into the floor. Symbols I didn't recognize, but instinctively knew were dangerous. This place. Mia trailed off, staring at the altar. What is it? It's some kind of ritual site, Jake muttered, his voice filled with unease. As we approached the altar, the low rumbling sound returned, louder this time. The floor beneath us seemed to tremble, and I could feel the vibrations in my feet. We shouldn't be here, Sarah said, taking a step back. We need to leave. Now! Before I could respond, a deep, guttural voice filled the chamber, echoing off the walls. You cannot leave. The voice was all around us, coming from every direction at once. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room, but there was no one there. Who's there? Jake demanded, his voice shaking. Show yourself. The voice laughed, a low, sinister sound that sent chills down my spine. You are already mine. Suddenly, the floor beneath the altar cracked open, and from the darkness below, something began to rise. A figure, tall and cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Run! I shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the exit. We sprinted back toward the passage, but the walls seemed to close in around us, twisting and warping as though the house itself was alive. I can't. Mia gasped, stumbling over debris. I turned back to help her, but the figure was faster. It reached out with long, twisted fingers and grabbed her, pulling her into the darkness. Mia! Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. I lunged forward, but it was too late. Mia was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Keep moving, I shouted, forcing Sarah and Jake ahead. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, the walls twisting and shifting around us as we ran. I could hear the figure behind us, its footsteps slow and deliberate, as though it knew we couldn't escape. We burst back into the main basement, but the door at the top of the stairs was still sealed shut. Jake, the door! I shouted. He threw himself against it again, but the door wouldn't budge. It's no use, he yelled, panic rising in his voice. The rumbling grew louder, and I knew we were out of time. The voice filled the room once more, echoing in our minds. You belong to me. The door finally gave way with a loud crack, but as we stumbled out into the cold night air, we knew the truth. We hadn't escaped. We had only delayed the inevitable.